Today we're going to dive into the raw, revolutionary worldview of George Jackson. This is a vision that wasn't cooked up in a university or some political think tank, but was forged in the solitary confinement cells of the American prison system. It's a perspective that is, well, as uncompromising as it is unsettling, and it all comes together in his final book, Blood in My Eye.
So, to really get a handle on Jackson's radical ideas, we have to start with the man himself. And we have to start with the one incident that put him on a collision course with the state for the rest of his life. This right here, this is the book at the center of our story today, Blood in My Eye. Now, Jackson didn't see this as just a collection of thoughts. For him, it was a weapon, his final statement in a lifelong war. And get this, he finished it just 7 days before he was killed in San Quentin prison.
So how did this war even begin? Well, it all started with just $70. That's it. His entire adult life, his whole transformation from a regular teenager into a full-blown revolutionary was sealed by this tiny amount of money.
Think about it. At just 18 years old, for his supposed role in a $70 gas station robbery, Jackson gets slapped with an indeterminate sentence, 1 year to life. His public defender told him to plead guilty, said he'd get a lighter sentence. Well, that 1 year turned into 11, and he would never be a free man again.
And listen to how Jackson himself described walking into this world. He didn't see it as a place for rehabilitation. No, for him, it was a kind of death. A place where just to survive, you had to completely rewire your soul. You see, once he was inside, Jackson wasn't just another number. The authorities, they saw him as a leader, a powerful organizer. And for that, as a punishment, they put him in extreme isolation. He spent more than 7 of his 11 years totally alone in a cell.
But here's the thing, that isolation, it turned into his own personal university. In those long, solitary years, he educated himself, just devouring the works of revolutionary thinkers. He said they redeemed him, gave him a new language and a whole new framework to understand his own life. It was all about transforming what the state called criminality into what he would call revolution.
So with this new education, this new framework, Jackson starts looking at American society in a whole new way. He came to see its problems not as, flaws that could be fixed, but as essential features of a system that was oppressive at its very core. He came up with a term for it, the fascist corporate state. To Jackson, American capitalism wasn't about freedom or opportunity. He argued it had turned into something else, a system where a tiny corporate elite controlled absolutely everything for their own profit, and they used the government to keep everyone else in line.
And he wasn't being vague about it either. He was specific. He saw this small, defined ruling class, the Fords, the Rockefellers, and he believed they held on to power not through democracy, but through what he saw as their own private enforcers, the military, the CIA, and the FBI.
And this is where he saw this massive, glaring hypocrisy in the justice system. You had street-level crime, which was punished brutally, while the bosses, the corporate elite, were celebrated for what he called the systemic looting of entire countries.
Okay, so if you've got this tiny elite running the whole show, who's actually on the ground enforcing their rules? Well, for Jackson, the answer was pretty obvious. It was the people he was dealing with every single day.
He didn't see the police or the military as these neutral protectors of the people. No way. He called them national repressive institutions. He argued their real job, their fundamental purpose, was to protect the property and the power of the ruling class and to crush anyone who dared to threaten it. And look, this wasn't just some abstract theory he was cooking up in his cell. This view was forged in the fire of real-life experience. His friend and comrade Angela Davis described encounters just like this one, where law enforcement acted less like peacekeepers and more like violent enforcers of a racial hierarchy. All right, so let's just recap for a second. If you genuinely believe you're living in a fascist state, one that's policed by repressive forces, what's your next move? For George Jackson and his brother Jonathan, the conclusion was inescapable. You prepare for war.
Now, the Jacksons weren't just making this stuff up. They became students of revolutionary warfare. They were basically absorbing the playbook laid out by figures like Che Guevara. The core ideas were all about speed, surprise, and constant movement. And the #1 rule? Never, ever get into a fight you can't win.
His younger brother Jonathan felt this burning urgency. At just 16 years old, he was arguing that the time for rallies and politics was over. He believed the system's violence had made a new, military-style response not just an option, but an absolute necessity.
And this is where their strategy gets really unique.
See, Che Guevara's theories were for jungles, for mountains. The Jacksons adapted them for a completely different battlefield, the American city. A city street becomes a narrow canyon, a defile. City blocks become fortresses. And the target isn't an army patrol. It's the state's infrastructure, power grids, transportation, communications.
And their planning was incredibly detailed. Jonathan came up with these very specific tactics, like converting a simple commercial truck into a mobile ambush vehicle, something that could just sweep an entire city street with machine gun fire from both the front and the back. This was urban warfare, planned down to the last nut and bolt. So both George and Jonathan would be killed before they could fully enact this vision. This leaves us with a question. What is the legacy of this intense, violent, and uncompromising call for revolution? If you boil Jackson's entire philosophy down to one core belief, it's this: the absolute rejection of reform. He didn't think the system could be improved or negotiated with. In his view, it had to be, and these are his words, completely destroyed, utterly, totally, ruthlessly, relentlessly destroyed.
And that uncompromising stance is exactly what made him a legend to so many. The co-founder of the Black Panther Party, Huey P. Newton, he called Jackson a hero who set a new standard. He believed that even though Jackson was gone, his ideas, his spirit would live on. In the end, the message of his final book was like a direct command to everyone who'd come after him. It was a plea to unite, to act, and to find your love and your humanity not in peace, but in the struggle itself. His final instruction was simple: pass on the torch.
George Jackson's life really forces us to confront his own brutal conclusion that a violent, oppressive system can only be defeated by a more organized and educated violence. And his story leaves us with this powerful question: what happens when a society's prisons stop being places of punishment and instead become its most effective schools for revolution?